So today I'm going to talk about something that may not be familiar to you because it's old school. Only a few of us around old school right now. And we'll all be dead soon, so even that school will be closing. So it's about JPEGs. Everybody know what a JPEG is? Okay, well let me tell you how I understand it, and let me tell you how it sort of represents us as humans. That human technology just seems to be us replicating ourselves in some inorganic way. And so I bought a new camera. Actually, it's a new camera, but an old style. It's a couple years old, but it's new. On Amazon, they always have those up there. And I thought, well, this would be good. I can save a lot of money, and I'll have a new camera, and it'll be better than the camera I have, and then I'll start taking pictures. So if you're curious about what kind of pictures I have taken with this new camera, we have postcards available for free that you can look at the postcards and mail them to your friends and family and say, look at Kusala's new camera. So what is a JPEG and what is a camera? The JPEG comes out of a little processor in your camera. So you have this lens, and the light and images come through the lens, and then it hits a mirror or a mirrorless camera with no mirror, and then it's recorded on your memory card. And if you have a 16 megapixel camera, your JPEG is about 5 megabytes. But there's something called RAW. Now RAW means it hasn't gone through the processor. It hasn't become a JPEG. It's just all the information in that one moment when the shutter was pressed is now recorded in a 16 megabyte file as compared to a 5 or 6 megabyte file. So what happens to all those megabytes that weren't used in the JPEG? They are just deleted, thrown away, never to be seen again. And when you take your picture, you probably want a smaller file size so you can post it on Facebook or Instagram or send it through email. But sometimes you wonder what the whole picture looked like. Now if you have a program called Lightroom or Photoshop, you can open up the raw file and see all the information in that picture. And you'd be surprised how well the JPEG processor does. You can adjust it with the wheels and pulleys and buttons and switches on your camera, and have more light or less light, and more color or less color, and more clarity or less clarity. And then you take the picture, and the little processor follows your instructions and makes this little file. But the raw file has no instructions. There is no way to manipulate the file until you open it in Lightroom or Photoshop. So that's what I've been doing lately. I looked at the JPEG and I said, you know, that JPEG's pretty good. I wonder what the raw file looks like. So I open up the raw file and look at all this new information I have to work with. So rather than the processor going by what I tell it to do, now I tell the program what to do and how I want to see it. Do I want more light or less light? Is the color clear enough or vibrant enough, or should I add some? And I'm in charge. I get to do all of that. Sometimes it takes 20, 30 minutes to work on one photo, which is why we have JPEG, so we don't have to work on any of it. We just look at it and go, wow, this is a remarkable photo. But then you turn this raw file, after you have brought it up to your standard, then you turn it into a JPEG, and then you can share it with the world. So it's a fascinating hobby, a fascinating way of looking at how we photograph and experience the world. One of the things I found at 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I had this epiphany. And of course, the best time to have an epiphany is 3 in the morning. because there's nobody else awake. It's relatively quiet in Los Angeles, and you can really think for a long time deeply on what you've just experienced. And then it's near impossible to go back to sleep, so you have even more time to think about it. And what I came to understand in my epiphany was that JPEG was my conditioning, that I was the processor that took this information moment to moment, and I discarded most of it and only used what was useful, and that became the picture of my life. So, if I was hungry, and I'm walking down the street, and there's a bakery, and I smell the donuts cooking, anything else on the street I probably would have just deleted in my mind. It wasn't useful information because I was hungry and I knew where I could find that donut. So, as we do with the processor, we have a lot of information. We delete most of it because we have a specific idea of how we want the picture to look, or we have a specific idea of how we want to experience our life in that moment. Now, the processor was created by a bunch of humans and coding, and it's just really complicated and amazing to have something so small do so much and change the way you experience the world on this picture or this screenshot. So now, the idea for me was, okay, how do I use this in my meditation practice? And where did my processor come from? Well, my processor came from, number one, Mom. She started it all. When you're born, you don't get a manual, you get a mother. And Mom started to build me, build this little human being. And there we go, okay. And then Mom said, you know, I can't build you anymore. We need to have other people help. I'm going to send you to kindergarten, where professional people will now continue to build you into the kind of person you need to be so you can succeed and have a wonderful life. And kindergarten was terrible. But I realized it's not easy being made into a new person. It hurts most of the time because you have to get rid of all the old paradigms and exchange them for the new ones. And you have to then bring in some abstract concepts like math. 4 oranges and 3 apples turns out to be 7. And I'm thinking to myself, how could that be? Then I understood. It's all abstract. It doesn't really mean anything except in your mind. And you can apply this to certain aspects of your life and find a solution. Okay, great. So I continued up the ladder of my education, grade school, high school, learning all sorts of useless information, but necessary to have cultural literacy. You see, if you want to be an American, you got to go through all this stuff and look at the world as an American. Now, I know it sounds weird, but one of the things we have to be is we have to be able to understand fallacy is truth, to be an American, but probably to be a German or a Swede. And one of the fallacies I learned in school was that George Washington cut down the cherry tree. And it was only later in my life that I found out that that was a complete falsehood. George Washington never cut down the cherry tree. And that story was used about truth and accountability. And I thought to myself, what is in my head? How did I get all these misconceptions? And I looked around and saw the world around me giving those misconceptions to me so I could be a certain way, so I could be a JPEG. Then I came to meditation. And meditation turned out to be my Photoshop, my Lightroom. That I could meditate, I could take the raw information I was experiencing and bypass the process and come to a place where I could see how the JPEG was manufactured. What information was necessary for that JPEG to exist. So we had religious models, and we had political models, and we had relationship models, and we had gender models, and we had car models, what's the best car, and all these things allowed me to look at the world in a very specific, personal way. So I'm saying to myself, okay, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to anesthetize my reality for a while. I'm just going to have information coming in and I'm not going to turn it into anything. I'm not going to turn the sound into a helicopter flying over the Zendo. You know? I'm not going to turn the smell into stinky feet. I'm not going to turn all these physical sensations into stories, which is what I do, and that's how I understand where I am and what happens next. Then I said to myself, well, you know, if I can anesthetize myself not to turn all that sense door information into a story, maybe I have the ability to be the Photoshop, to take the raw information and use the sliders to give it more or less. More wisdom, less fantasy, more generosity, less greed. Maybe I can do that. Maybe I can then create this picture of my life, not because of what I've been conditioned to do, but because what I have found to be useful and skillful and to reduce my suffering. So there I was in my dark room, the laboratory, the Zendo, and I was acquiring all this information. And then I started to reflect, well, what's the biggest issue about being a human being according to Buddhism? And when you're sitting in meditation, you got nothing else to think about. You're just there, and all this stuff keeps coming up. 10 years ago, you ate a taco and you got sick, and you're thinking to yourself, that memory is still there, buried down deep inside? Yeah. And then there's that girl you took to the prom. I wonder what she's doing these days, you know. That happens. And then that first car that you bought, and what a great car it was, and it was only $400. It was the best car you ever had. And all these things keep coming up. And the idea is to just let them come up. Not to identify with them, not to be them. They don't have to define you. They're simply thoughts created by the thinker. Okay, so I'm the thinker, but they don't have to be my thoughts. They just have to be thoughts that are happening because I have a mind and a body, and I've had so many years of experience, and I've crammed all that stuff in there. And now I came to Buddhism, and now the Buddha said you got to be really careful, because if you get involved with attachment or aversion, you will suffer. Wow, I said. Attachment and aversion. It's not about having the wrong car. It's about attachment and aversion. So I started to analyze my thoughts through the filter of attachment and aversion. What am I attached to? What do I have aversion to? Can I change that? Does it have to be mandatory, or is it flexible? Can I turn the switch off and on? And have aversion when it's important, like not driving crazy. I have aversion to driving crazy because I could die and kill other people. That's sort of a good kind of aversion. We might call it judgment. You know, and then there's that attachment, and there's all sorts of really good kinds of attachment. Like I got a box of 16 ice cream sandwiches, all in one box. And they're so tasty and cool on those hot, humid days. And you might eat 3, 4, or 5 of them and wish you hadn't. But while you were eating them, they were so good. And it's just such an example of greed and attachment and how it can overcome your logic and your wisdom and just make you sick. I'm going, okay, I'm starting to see this working now. I have this greed, and I have this attachment, and I have this aversion, and I have this hatred. And yeah, I can run those through the filters of my personal experience. They can be my Photoshop or Lightroom, and then I'll come out with a new JPEG, a Buddhist JPEG. He'll be the Buddhist guy because he's been processed in a certain way. So he won't be the Catholic guy or the Jewish guy or the Islamic guy, because they're processed in a different way. But he'll be the Buddhist guy because his processor now has been fine-tuned to the Dhamma. And the Dharma now allows him to filter everything he experiences to see the wisdom or the failure of what he's thinking, saying, and doing. And of course, one of the best resources we have in understanding skillful or unskillful is our karma. So now we throw that filter in. Not only do we have attachment and aversion, now we have the filter of karma. And that can tell us a whole lot about ourselves and what we're doing and how we're doing it. So the karma is everything we think, do, and say. Karma is everything we think, do, and say. It creates new form of energy with a moral value. Skillful karma, unskillful karma. And then we have those consequences that arise from skillful and unskillful, and they can be more suffering and less suffering. So that can be one of the ways we can experience our life and judge or critique how we're doing. Not that we're being good or bad, but we're being skillful or unskillful as a Buddhist. As a Buddhist. Now the Buddhist hat is really big. You know, sometimes you see these sun hats and the brim is like 5 feet. There's not a speck of sun hitting those people wearing that hat. And that's how the Buddhist hat looks. It's like 5-foot brim. And you just wear it. And people just sort of part because it's so big they have to let you by. And they start to see that it covers a lot of information, this Buddhist hat, because the brim is so wide and broad. And it's pretty much covers everything you're ever going to do in your life. It pretty much covers everything you're ever going to say in your life. And pretty much covers everything you're going to think in your life. That's how big this Buddhist hat is. And it takes a while to find the right size and the right fit. But once you do, you don't have to guess about stuff. It's not, this has become the Photoshop, and you're taking this information and you're creating your life. But the difference between the JPEG and the raw file, you're in charge. That's what I like about doing those postcards. I'm in charge of how that postcard looks. And to me, it might look spectacular. But to somebody else, they might go, that's okay. You know? And that's really the unique feature of being a human, is we're all so individualistic. We all interpret everything in our own special, unique way. And in the whole time the earth has been here and humans have walked on it, there has never been anybody like us. We are the first ones like us to walk on this earth. And we'll be the last ones. Now, some are leaving a legacy behind. We call that children. And they'll be similar, but not the same. We are totally unique. And our filters are totally unique. Education and experience have created those filters for us. So if I look at something, say I go to the Modern Art Museum, which I hate because I don't understand anything that's on the walls. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, why would people think this is art? And the price tag is $4 million. What do they see that I am missing? And I just sometimes have to just walk away and say, I don't know. I don't know. But there are other times, for instance, I'll be in the backyard and I'll see this little flower, and I'll take a picture of this little flower standing alone. And to me, that's just the most amazing thing. I posted something yesterday from Alice in Wonderland. Alice is talking to the rose and asks the rose, aren't you really afraid of being out here all alone? There's nobody close to help you. And she says, well, I have the tree that's in the middle of me that I'm wrapped around. And Alice says, but how can the tree protect you? And the rose says, it can bark. I'm thinking, that's like the perfect little couple sentences. And I actually found a picture of a tree with a rose wrapped around it. How lucky was that? It took me 20 minutes, but I found it. So we have these filters. We're unique in our being and our doing. We are experiencing our world through our sense doors. We have 6 of them. We have the eye, we have the nose, we have the ear, we have the tongue, we have the body, and we have the mind. And those 6 sense doors are bringing in all this information like the lens of a camera. And then we have our processor, which is what we've been taught to be, the I, me, and mine, that translates it and gets rid of all the stuff that's not pertinent to that particular moment in our life, and that's our JPEG. And then the meditator says, but I want to see all the information and see if I can work with that. And so you talk to people who meditate 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and they really do process their information differently. And a lot of times they will lose old friends because the old friends can't figure out what the heck they're talking about, because they can't experience the world in that way because they don't meditate. They're still working at the JPEG level. The meditators have moved on to the raw level with all the information, understanding it to be unique to them because they are now going to process it intentionally and not just let it happen, because that's the way they were brought up to think of the world. Fantastic stuff. Now, as to go off into a slightly different angle here, there was a wonderful movie of Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, and they were talking about their life and their experiences and their LSD and their psychedelics and all that kind of stuff. And they ended up writing a book with Ralph Metzner called The Psychedelic Experience, which is what they used the Tibetan Book of the Dead to translate an LSD trip, because both of them had to do with consciousness unfolding and breaking apart and then coming back together again. Now, I've never taken a psychedelic drug, but I've often thought the problem with psychedelics is everything becomes the raw file. And you can't put it in any context that's familiar or comfortable. And there you're sort of stuck for 12 hours experiencing your life completely. And then gradually everything sort of closes down and comes back together. And then that little you, me or mine, ends up being there again, but in a little different way, because now it's sort of seeing all the information and it's seeing the processor, and now it isn't as solid as it used to be. The problem with that, it happens too fast, and you can't integrate any of those insights into your everyday life. It takes years. And meditation takes years. And meditation does the same thing, but in a much more gradual and understandable way. And granted, we can come to places in our meditation practice that give us a pause and say, what the hell was that? But then we can continue to go on and integrate that insight into the new raw file that has become us. And we can be so much bigger than we used to be. And not in a negative way, not in an ego way, but in the way of wisdom and insight. So buying that new camera has caused me to think in a much different way about my life and JPEGs and RAW files. And I would encourage anybody that has a cell phone, put that sucker down and get a camera. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions or comments on what I've said about anything? Hey, Stephen.
I had one, but I lost it. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
We'll come back.